The first time Willow Creek refused to let me see my mother, they blamed a stomach virus. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late October, and I was standing in the lobby with a paper bag of lemon cookies pressed against my coat. They were still warm. My mother liked them soft in the middle, and I had driven across town during my lunch break because she had sounded strange on the phone that morning. Not sick, not confused, afraid. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett," the receptionist said. "The third floor is under temporary visitation restrictions." Her name tag said Kelsey, and she looked young enough to still ask permission before staying out late. She kept her eyes fixed on the computer screen. "What kind of restrictions? Health and safety?" That isn't an answer. Her fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. There may have been a gastrointestinal illness among some residents. May have been. I don't have access to clinical details. "Is my mother sick?" "You'll need to speak with the nursing director." I called her twice. "She's unavailable." "Then I'll wait." Kelsey finally looked at me. There was something in her expression I didn't like. Not irritation, nervousness. Before she could respond, a man stepped out of the administrative hallway. He was in his early 50s, neatly dressed, with silver at his temples and a smile that arrived too quickly. "Ms. Bennett? That depends on who's asking. Thomas Vale, Executive Director." He offered his hand. I shifted the bag of cookies into my other arm but didn't take it. "My mother called me at 8 this morning," I said. "She asked me to come." "I understand Evelyn has been having some difficulty adjusting. She's been here 3 weeks. Transitions can be challenging for older adults. My mother said someone took her phone." His smile remained in place. "Residents occasionally misplace personal items. She didn't say she misplaced it." Thomas glanced toward Kelsey. "She may have misunderstood." My mother, Evelyn Harper, was 78 years old. She had arthritis in both knees, high blood pressure, and a habit of correcting television game shows before the contestants answered. She still balanced her own checkbook. She did crossword puzzles in ink. The week before moving into Willow Creek, she had caught a mistake in the closing documents for the sale of her house. My mother misunderstood very little. "Who evaluated her?" I asked. "Our care team observes residents daily." "That wasn't my question." His smile weakened. "We can arrange a meeting to discuss her adjustment." "I'd like to see her now." As Kelsey explained, visitation is temporarily suspended. "Who authorized the suspension?" "The clinical department." "Name?" "I'm not sure that information would be helpful." "It would be extremely helpful." A security guard near the elevator shifted his weight. Until that moment, I had assumed he was standing there by chance. Now I noticed he had positioned himself directly between me and the hallway. I placed the bag of cookies on the reception desk. "Please give me the written policy authorizing Willow Creek to deny access to a resident's healthcare representative." Thomas blinked. Just once. "I'm sorry?" "I also want the date the restriction began, the name of the medical professional who approved it, and a copy of the notice sent to residents' families. We'll provide any information required by law." "I'm not asking what you'll provide eventually. I'm asking what you have now." His expression changed. The friendliness remained, but it looked thinner, more deliberate. "Ms. Bennett, I understand you're protective of your mother." "I am. Frequent visits can sometimes make the transition more difficult." "My mother and I speak twice a day, which may be contributing to her dependence." There it was. A small sentence, carefully delivered, designed to make me question myself. For 6 months, I had questioned nearly every decision involving my mother. After her second fall, I had spent nights reading brochures, inspection reports, and resident reviews. I toured 7 facilities. Willow Creek had been the cleanest, the quietest, and the most expensive. The sales director had shown us a rose garden, a bright dining room, and a private suite with a view of an old maple tree. My mother had squeezed my hand and said, "You're not putting me anywhere, Laura. We're choosing this together." I had wanted to believe that. I had also wanted to believe that 86 pages of promises meant something. "I'd still like to see her," I said. "That won't be possible today." The elevator doors opened behind him. A nursing assistant emerged pushing a laundry cart. For a brief moment, I could see the security monitor mounted above the reception desk. It displayed several camera angles. One showed the third-floor nurse's station. My mother was standing beside it. She wore the blue cardigan I had bought her for her birthday. Her gray hair was loose around her face, though she always pinned it back before lunch. A woman in dark green scrubs had one hand wrapped around my mother's elbow. My mother tried to pull away. Then she looked directly at the camera. Even through the grainy image, I recognized what she was doing. She was trying to be seen. Thomas stepped in front of the monitor. "You'll need to leave now," he said. I looked at the security guard, then at Kelsey, then back at Thomas. I could have shouted. I could have threatened him. A younger version of me might have pushed toward the elevator and forced everyone in that lobby to explain themselves. But anger makes people careless, and Thomas Vale did not look like a careless man. So I picked up the cookies. "Tell my mother I came. I'll make sure someone lets her know." No, I removed one of my business cards from my purse and placed it on the desk. "Give her this." Kelsey reached for it. Thomas picked it up first. He looked at my name, then at the line beneath it. Laura Bennett, Senior Contracts Counsel. His eyes lifted slowly. I had spent 18 years reviewing agreements for an insurance company. My work was not glamorous. I didn't stand in courtrooms or give dramatic speeches. I read fine print. I noticed missing words. I found the sentence someone had buried on page 74 because they hoped nobody would read that far. Thomas slipped the card into his jacket pocket. "We'll be in touch." "I'm sure you will." I walked out without looking back. At 7:13 that evening, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered immediately. "Mom?" For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then my mother whispered, "Laura, don't believe them." I stood up from the kitchen table. "Where are you?" "The laundry room." "What happened to your phone?" "They took it." "Who?" "The nurse with the red glasses. She said I was making too many calls." "Are you hurt?" "No. Did anyone give you medication?" "They tried." My hand tightened around the phone. "What did they try to give you?" "I don't know. I wouldn't take it." "Good." "They keep saying you're too busy to visit." My chest went still. "Mom, I was there today." Silence. Then she said, "I knew they were lying." A door closed somewhere behind her. My mother lowered her voice. "They want me to sign something." "What?" "They won't let me read all of it." "Don't sign anything." I didn't. "Listen carefully. Don't argue with them tonight. Don't tell anyone you called me." "Laura, I'm getting you out." Footsteps approached her end of the line. Before the call ended, my mother whispered one final sentence. "They already know how much money I have." The line went dead. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Then I crossed the room and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was my mother's Willow Creek residency agreement, all 86 pages. I placed it on the table, picked up a pen, and began reading from the first line. The last time I had read that contract, I was trying to convince myself my mother would be safe. This time, I was looking for the exact clause that would help me bring Willow Creek down. I slept less than 2 hours that night, not because I was overwhelmed, because my mind refused to stop assembling pieces that no longer felt unrelated. For weeks, I had blamed myself for moving my mother into Willow Creek. Every brochure had promised compassion. Every smiling employee had spoken about dignity, independence, and personalized care. Now those words felt less like promises and more like marketing slogans wrapped around something I couldn't yet see. At 5:30 the next morning, I brewed coffee, spread the 86-page residency agreement across my dining room table, and opened the binder that held every document from my mother's admission. Most people assume lawyers memorize contracts. We don't. We learn where people hide things. Every unnecessary paragraph. Every vague sentence. Every exception buried beneath reassuring language. Somewhere inside those pages was the answer to what they believed they were allowed to do. I found it just after sunrise. Section 14. 3 temporary visitation restrictions. At first glance, it appeared straightforward. The facility reserved the right to limit visitors during infectious outbreaks. Reasonable enough. But halfway through the paragraph came a sentence most people would skim without thinking. Such restrictions shall be applied equally to all residents and communicated in writing to the resident and designated legal representative within 24 hours of implementation. I leaned back. No letter had arrived, no email, no phone call, nothing. Which meant one of two things. Either there had never been an outbreak, or Willow Creek had violated its own contract. Neither possibility was good for them. I kept reading. Section 17, Resident Communication Rights. Residents retained unrestricted access to private telephone communication unless a licensed physician documented that such communication presented an immediate medical risk. Not a nurse, not an administrator, a physician. My mother had told me someone simply took her phone. No explanation, no medical order, no consent. By 8 o'clock, I had highlighted 14 different clauses. By 8:15, I had drafted a formal records request. Not an emotional email, not an accusation, just facts. I requested every document related to my mother's care since admission. Medication administration records, physician notes, incident reports, behavioral assessments, visitor logs, phone restriction orders, internal communication regarding visitation, any documentation supporting claims of confusion or cognitive decline. The contract gave them 48 hours to comply. I attached the relevant sections, then I pressed send. Exactly 6 minutes later, my phone rang. Thomas Vale. That surprised me. People who know they're right usually let lawyers respond. People who know they're wrong often try to solve problems before attorneys become involved. "Laura," he said pleasantly, "I received your email." "I'm sure you did." "I think we're allowing a misunderstanding to become something larger." "I don't. We're simply trying to help your mother adjust." "By confiscating her phone?" There was the slightest pause. It wasn't confiscated. "What would you call removing someone's personal property without permission?" Our nursing staff believed excessive phone use was increasing her anxiety. Who made that determination? Our clinical team. Which physician signed the order? Silence. Tiny, almost invisible, but it was there. "I don't have her chart in front of me." "I'll wait." Another pause. Then he changed directions. "Laura, I know situations like this can become emotional." That sentence irritated me more than anything he'd said so far. Not because it was insulting, because it was calculated. He wasn't speaking to me as a daughter anymore. He was trying to redefine me, from concerned to irrational. It was a strategy I'd seen before. Insurance companies sometimes labeled perfectly reasonable claimants as emotionally invested. Once that label appeared, everything they said became easier to dismiss. Thomas was trying to do the same thing. "I don't think emotion is the issue," I replied. "I think documentation is. We've cared for hundreds of families, and today we're discussing one. Our staff has your mother's best interests at heart. Then you'll have no difficulty producing the records." His tone cooled. "We'll provide everything we're legally required to provide." I look forward to reading it. I ended the call before he could regain control of the conversation. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was someone I trusted. "Laura, it was Dr. Samuel Levin. He had been my mother's physician for nearly 13 years. He knew every medication she'd ever taken, every surgery, every allergy. He attended my father's funeral. If anyone understood my mother's health, it was him. I received something unusual this morning," he said. "What happened?" Willow Creek faxed a medication request. My stomach tightened. "What kind?" "They're requesting authorization to begin quetiapine." I stared across the kitchen. For a second, the words refused to make sense. Then they did. Quetiapine, an antipsychotic. Used appropriately, it could help patients with certain psychiatric illnesses. Used inappropriately, it could leave an elderly person sleepy, slower, quieter, more compliant. "Why?" I asked. "They describe increased agitation." "My mother isn't agitated." "They also mention paranoia." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because I suddenly understood exactly what they were doing. My mother told them they stole her phone. "I assume that's why you're laughing. They're calling reality paranoia." Dr. Levin became quiet. "Laura, they blocked my visits." "They didn't mention that." "They're trying to isolate her." "They didn't mention that either." I took a slow breath. "Did you approve the medication?" "No." Relief washed over me. "I wanted to speak with you first." "Can you examine her yourself?" "I can." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Don't tell Willow Creek until we're there." He hesitated. "That's an unusual request." "So is medicating someone before speaking with their family physician?" Another silence. Finally, he said, "I'll meet you at 10. After we hung up, I printed every email Thomas had sent, every clause I'd highlighted, every note I'd written. Something about the entire situation felt increasingly organized. Too organized. Like each step followed a script. Restrict communication, question credibility, suggest medication, control information. I couldn't prove it yet, but I could feel the pattern forming. At 3:00 that afternoon, Willow Creek emailed 17 pages in response to my records request. Only 17. That alone told me they were choosing what I could see. The medication records stopped 3 days earlier. The nursing notes were incomplete. There were no physician orders restricting phone use, no documentation supporting cognitive decline, no outbreak notices, no visitor restriction logs. Instead, buried between 2 routine assessment forms, I found something else. A document titled Resident Support Authorization. I had never seen it before. My mother's name appeared at the top. The form granted Willow Creek authority to coordinate communication with banks, insurance companies, and financial institutions to ensure uninterrupted continuity of resident services. The signature line was blank. I read the document twice, then a third time. At the bottom, in tiny gray print almost impossible to notice, was a code. Form 7B, Enhanced Asset Coordination Program. I searched the facility's website. Nothing. I searched Haven Ridge Senior Communities, Willow Creek's parent company. Nothing. No mention of Form 7B, no explanation. It was as if the document wasn't meant to exist outside the admissions office. I picked up my phone and called First National Bank. The branch manager, Carol Simmons, recognized my voice immediately. "Laura, how's your mother settling in?" "Not as well as we'd hoped." There was genuine sympathy in her voice. "I'm sorry to hear that. I have a question." "Of course." "Has anyone from Willow Creek contacted you?" Carol hesitated. "Actually," my pulse quickened. "Yesterday." "What did they ask?" "They wanted to know the process for redirecting recurring payments from your mother's account." I closed my eyes. "Did they identify themselves?" "Yes." "Did they provide written authorization?" "No." "What did you tell them?" "That we couldn't discuss anything without verified authorization." "Did they seem surprised?" "A little." "Who called?" Carol looked at her notes. "A woman named Renee Dalton." "The director of nursing. Why would the director of nursing need to know how to access my mother's finances?" The question stayed with me long after the call ended. That evening, I reopened my mother's admission paperwork. This time, I wasn't reading the contract. I was reading the financial disclosure forms. During admission, Willow Creek required proof that residents could afford long-term care. Bank balances, investment accounts, monthly income, property sale proceeds, everything. The facility knew my mother had nearly $800,000 after selling the family home. They knew she had no surviving spouse. They knew I was her only child. And according to the story they were beginning to build. They also wanted everyone to believe she was becoming confused. I sat perfectly still. Then another thought entered my mind. One so unsettling it made me reach for my laptop immediately. If this had happened to my mother, had it happened before? I typed the name of Willow Creek's parent company into the search bar. Then I added 2 words. Lawsuit. The first result wasn't about Willow Creek. It was another nursing home owned by the same corporation. Different state, different family, almost identical allegations, restricted visitation, claims of sudden confusion, pressure to sign financial authorization documents, medication requests shortly before legal paperwork appeared. I opened the complaint and began reading. Halfway through the first page, I realized something that made the room feel suddenly colder. This wasn't beginning to look like one dishonest administrator. It was beginning to look like a system, and if I was right, my mother wasn't the first target. She was simply the newest one. I barely slept after discovering the lawsuit. Not because it frightened me, because it confirmed something I had been trying not to believe. Patterns don't happen by accident. One dishonest employee can lie. 2 employees can cover for each other. But when nearly identical allegations appear in different facilities owned by the same corporation, separated by hundreds of miles and years apart, you're no longer looking at coincidence. You're looking at a business model. The lawsuit had eventually been settled. Most of the financial details were sealed, but the original complaint remained public. I read every page, then every exhibit attached to it. Around 10 o'clock that morning, I found the daughter's name, Maria Santos. There was no phone number, no email address, just enough information to begin searching. By lunchtime, I found her on LinkedIn. Her profile hadn't been updated in months. I sent one short message. I believe something similar may be happening to my mother. If you're willing to talk, I'd appreciate your time. I expected to wait days. She answered 43 minutes later. Call me. There was a phone number beneath the message. I dialed immediately. She answered on the first ring. Laura? Yes. I'm glad you reached out. Her voice sounded tired. Not physically tired, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a fight long after everyone else believes it's over. I'm sorry to contact you out of nowhere. Don't apologize. There was a pause. I've been hoping someone eventually would. I looked out the kitchen window while she began telling me about her father. Luis Santos had been 81 when he moved into Cedar Grove. Like my mother, he had sold his house after becoming too unsteady to live alone. Like my mother, he had remained mentally sharp. He balanced his own investments until the day he moved in, Maria said. He still corrected my Spanish grammar. I smiled despite everything. My mother still corrects mine. Maria laughed softly. It lasted barely 2 seconds. Then the laughter disappeared. Everything was perfect for the first month. That sentence sounded painfully familiar. They called every week, she continued. They invited me to family dinners. They complimented my father constantly. When did it change? The day they learned how much money he had. I didn't interrupt. They started asking questions that had nothing to do with his care. Questions like rental properties, investments, insurance, whether he planned to leave assets equally to all of us. I felt my stomach tighten. Willow Creek had required similar financial disclosures before admitting my mother. At the time, I thought it was standard procedure. Now I wondered how much of it had been necessary. And then, I asked, they began documenting behaviors. What kind? Maria sighed. Confusion, paranoia, difficulty adjusting. My father insisted someone kept entering his room. Were they? Yes. How do you know? Because 6 months later, another employee admitted it during a deposition. I stopped writing notes. What? They were performing random room inspections looking for financial paperwork. The silence between us became almost unbearable. They found copies of property deeds, investment statements, my father's safe deposit box key. They documented everything. I felt cold despite the warm kitchen. Did your father know? He knew something was wrong, but every time he complained. They wrote another behavioral note. The strategy was becoming terrifyingly familiar. Document concern, question credibility, reduce family access, suggest medication, repeat. What happened after that? They introduced paperwork. What kind? Financial assistance forms, bill payment authorizations, property management options. My father refused. For weeks. And then, Maria's voice broke for the first time. They convinced him I'd already agreed. I closed my eyes. He trusted them. He trusted me. They simply told him I wanted it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. Did they isolate him from you? Gradually. First they claimed he needed rest. Then they limited visits because he became emotional. Eventually, they transferred him to another facility nearly 3 hours away. Without your permission? They said his medical needs had changed. Had they? No. What actually changed was that I had hired an attorney. The room became silent. Outside my kitchen window, a squirrel climbed the old maple tree my father had planted 25 years earlier. For a strange moment, I envied it. Life seemed so simple when survival depended on gathering food instead of gathering evidence. Maria? Yes? What happened to your lawsuit? She laughed again. This time there was no warmth in it. They settled. Why? My father was dying. I didn't want his last month spent in depositions. I understood. Sometimes winning wasn't the same as healing. They required confidentiality. So, how can you tell me all this? I can't discuss the settlement, but I can discuss what happened to my family. Before ending the call, Maria said something I would remember for the rest of my life. They don't expect daughters who read everything. What do you mean? They're used to families trusting the brochures. They're used to people assuming administrators know best. They're used to exhausted children who are juggling jobs and guilt. She paused. But you're different. Why? Because you ask for documents before explanations. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes. Then I opened my laptop again. This time, I wasn't searching for lawsuits. I was researching Haven Ridge Senior Communities. The corporation owned 34 nursing homes across 4 states. Their annual reports praised compassionate care, resident-centered values, family partnerships. Awards covered their homepage. But buried inside financial filings was something that caught my attention: revenue from resident financial services. The phrase appeared only once. No explanation, no breakdown, just 3 words: resident financial services. I searched deeper. Eventually, I found a small subsidiary company, Haven Ridge Resident Solutions. The business address matched the corporate headquarters. According to public filings, it specialized in financial administration for elderly clients. My pulse quickened. The blank form I'd found: resident support authorization, the code printed at the bottom. Enhanced Asset Coordination Program. It wasn't random paperwork. It connected directly to a corporate subsidiary. I printed everything: company registrations, financial reports, board members, corporate officers. The stack grew thicker by the minute. At exactly 4:17 that afternoon, my cell phone rang. Unknown number. Again. I answered immediately. Mom? No. It was Dr. Levin. His voice sounded different, more serious. I just finished examining your mother. My heart pounded. How is she? Alert. Fully oriented. No signs whatsoever of dementia. Relief hit me so suddenly I had to sit down. But the word stopped me. What? There are bruises. I gripped the edge of the table. Where? Both wrists. My mind immediately returned to the security monitor. The woman gripping my mother's arm. They're recent. Can you determine how they happened? They're consistent with forceful restraint. I stopped breathing. They told me she was becoming difficult. They documented agitation. They requested antipsychotic medication. Dr. Levin became very quiet. Then he said something I never expected to hear from a physician who had spent decades avoiding legal disputes. Laura, yes? If I were you? He hesitated carefully. I wouldn't just hire a lawyer. I'd notify the state. My eyes moved slowly toward the thick stack of contracts and corporate records covering my dining room table. Until that moment, I had believed I was fighting to protect my mother. Now I realized something much larger. If Dr. Levin was right, there were probably dozens of families who had never discovered what had happened inside facilities like Willow Creek. And someone needed to stop it before another daughter walked into a nursing home carrying warm cookies, only to discover she'd already been replaced by a lie. Most people assume that once you report something to the state, the government immediately steps in. That isn't how it works. Investigations take time, evidence has to be gathered, interviews scheduled, documents reviewed. Meanwhile, my mother was still sleeping under the same roof as the people I no longer trusted. I wasn't willing to wait. The morning after speaking with Dr. Levin, I drove to the Department of Health's regional office carrying a banker's box filled with contracts, emails, medical notes, and printed screenshots from Haven Ridge's corporate filings. The woman at the reception desk looked surprised when I placed the heavy box on the counter. Can I help you? I need to file a formal complaint against a licensed long-term care facility. She glanced at the box. I'd say you've come prepared. I hope so. An investigator named Angela Brooks met me 20 minutes later. She was probably in her early 60s, dressed plainly, carrying a legal pad that looked as though she'd worn through dozens before this one. She didn't waste time. Tell me why you're here. I didn't start with my opinions. I started with facts. The blocked visit, the missing phone, the medication request, the undocumented visitation restrictions, the financial authorization form, the bank inquiry, Dr. Levin's examination, the bruises on my mother's wrists. Angela interrupted only once. Do you have proof of the bruising? I slid photographs across the table. Dr. Levin had documented everything before leaving Willow Creek. She studied them for several seconds. Then she quietly asked, Did anyone at the facility explain these injuries? They claimed my mother had become resistant to care. Angela nodded slowly. Do you know how many complaints we've received involving Haven Ridge facilities over the last 5 years? No. I can't tell you the exact number. She closed the file, but I can tell you yours isn't the first. Those words settled heavily between us. So why are they still operating? She sighed. Because proving poor care is difficult. What about fraud? Even harder. What about isolation? That depends. On what? Whether we can prove it was intentional. I leaned forward. I think I can. Angela raised an eyebrow. I handed her another folder. This is every clause they violated in their own contract. She opened it. For nearly 10 minutes, she said nothing. She simply read, highlight after highlight, margin note after margin note. Finally, she looked up. You're an attorney. I review contracts. I can tell. She tapped one page. You found something interesting. I think I found several things. The visitation policy required written notice. There wasn't one. The communication restriction required a physician's order. There wasn't one. The medication request reached Dr. Levin before he had even evaluated my mother. There was no diagnosis supporting it. Every decision seemed to skip the safeguards that protected residents. Angela wrote quickly. This changes the direction of the investigation. How? Instead of asking whether mistakes were made, she looked directly at me. We begin asking whether procedures were intentionally bypassed. That single sentence gave me more hope than I'd felt in days. Before I left, Angela handed me her card. If anything changes, call me immediately. I will. And, Laura, I stopped at the door. Don't tell Willow Creek we're investigating. I wasn't planning to. They'll start cleaning up. I figured. You'd be surprised how many people warn the facility first. I've read too many contracts to make that mistake. She smiled for the first time. So have I. That afternoon, I visited my mother. This time, they couldn't stop me. Dr. Levin had ordered a follow-up examination, and under both state regulations and the residency agreement, Willow Creek had no authority to refuse access. Thomas Vale was waiting in the lobby. I wasn't expecting you. I know. We would have appreciated notice. I'm sure you would have. His smile barely lasted a second. I understand you've been speaking with outside parties. I speak with lots of people. I hope you aren't allowing misunderstandings to escalate. I ignored the comment. I'd like to see my mother. I'll have someone escort you. No, he frowned. I'm perfectly capable of finding her room. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped aside. Of course. As I walked toward the elevator, I noticed something immediately. The atmosphere had changed. Residents who had previously gathered near the activity room were gone. Several bulletin boards had been updated overnight. Staff members smiled more than before. Too much. It felt staged, like someone had announced an inspection without admitting one was coming. When I reached my mother's room, she was sitting by the window reading a mystery novel. She looked up. The relief on her face hurt more than anything else. You came. I told you I would. She hugged me tightly, then whispered into my shoulder, They're nervous. I leaned back. What makes you say that? The nurse with the red glasses apologized. That caught my attention. For what? For taking my phone. Did she give it back? Mom nodded. It was on my nightstand this morning. Interesting. Very interesting. Without another word, I looked around the room. Everything appeared neat. Almost too neat. Then I noticed something missing. The framed photograph of my father. It always sat beside her bed. Now the table was empty. Mom, where's Dad's picture? She frowned. I asked the same thing. What did they say? They told me I never brought one. That's impossible. I know. I had packed the room myself. Every sweater, every photograph, every book, every framed memory. My father hadn't disappeared. Someone had removed him. I searched the drawers. Nothing. The closet. Nothing. Finally, I pressed the call button. A nursing assistant entered. Can I help you? Yes. My mother's photograph is missing. She looked genuinely confused. I'll ask housekeeping. When? Today? No. I smiled politely. We'll wait. She hesitated. I have other residents. So do your coworkers. She left. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying the photograph. The frame was dusty. One corner had been chipped. I found it in storage. I looked at her. Storage? It must have been placed there accidentally. Mom reached for the frame, gently brushing dust from my father's smiling face. Then she quietly said, They told me memories sometimes make residents emotional. The room became perfectly still. I stared at the nursing assistant. She lowered her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, someone looked ashamed. That evening, after taking my mother out for dinner under Dr. Levin's temporary medical order, I sat at home reviewing one last document Angela had suggested I obtain. Willow Creek's most recent state inspection report. It was publicly available, 143 pages. Most people would never read it. I did. Page after page contained routine observations, fire drills, kitchen sanitation, medication storage, nothing remarkable, until page 98. There, buried in a corrective action plan, was a citation issued 18 months earlier. Failure to safeguard resident personal property, the facility had promised new procedures, additional staff training, improved documentation. The violation had been marked as corrected. But attached to the citation was a list of missing items reported by residents. Jewelry, cash, family photographs, personal documents. I stared at the page. Family photographs. Not one, not two. 7 separate reports. Suddenly, my father's missing picture no longer looked like a careless mistake. It looked intentional. Because photographs remind people who they are, who they love, who is waiting for them outside those walls. If you wanted an elderly resident to feel isolated, you wouldn't just take away a phone. You'd quietly erase every reminder that someone was coming back for them. And for the first time, I realized the real purpose wasn't simply controlling my mother's money. It was convincing her she had already been forgotten. That night, I called investigator Angela Brooks. When she answered, I said only one sentence. I think I figured out how they break people before they ever ask them to sign. There was a long pause. Then she replied, "Come to my office first thing tomorrow." Something in her voice told me she had just connected a piece of the puzzle, too. And whatever we were about to uncover, it was far bigger than Willow Creek alone. The call from investigator Angela Brooks came at exactly 8:12 the next morning. "Don't come to my office," she said. Something in her voice immediately told me the situation had changed. Why not? Because Haven Ridge knows a complaint has been filed. I sat upright. How? We're required to notify the facility before conducting a formal inspection. So they've had time to prepare? Yes, and if what you've described is accurate, they've also had time to remove evidence. I closed my eyes for a moment. I had expected resistance. I hadn't expected a warning system built into the process itself. They've requested an emergency care conference. Angela continued. They specifically asked that you attend. When? Today. Who will be there? The executive director, the nursing director, the facility physician, and someone from Haven Ridge's legal department. I almost laughed. Yesterday, I had been dismissed as an overprotective daughter. Today, they were bringing in corporate attorneys. That told me everything I needed to know. I'll be there. At 1 o'clock sharp, I walked into Willow Creek carrying a leather briefcase that weighed less than 5 pounds. The real weight was inside it. Copies of contracts, emails, medical records, inspection reports, corporate filings, photographs, everything. Thomas Vale met me outside the conference room. His smile looked practiced. "Laura." "Thomas, I'm glad you agreed to meet. I didn't have much choice. We all want what's best for Evelyn. I've noticed people here say that a lot." He ignored the comment. Inside the room sat 4 people. Thomas, Renee Dalton, a physician I had never met, and a woman wearing a charcoal gray suit. She stood as I entered. Rebecca Collins. She extended her hand. "Corporate Counsel for Haven Ridge Senior Communities." I shook it once, firmly, then sat down without another word. Rebecca opened a folder. "We appreciate your concerns." "I'm sure you do. Our goal today is to improve communication." "Excellent. I'd like complete answers then." Thomas shifted in his chair. Rebecca smiled professionally. "Before we begin, we'd like to discuss a confidential resolution." There it was, much sooner than I expected. "What kind of resolution?" "We understand transitions are stressful. We're prepared to waive several months of residency fees." I said nothing. Renee leaned forward. "We're also willing to assign your mother a private patient advocate." Still nothing. Rebecca continued. "If you'd prefer another Haven Ridge community, we'll transfer her at no additional cost." I looked at each of them, one by one. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "In exchange for what?" The room became quiet. Rebecca folded her hands. We simply hope to move forward cooperatively. I asked a different question. Another pause. Finally, she answered. We would ask that any pending complaints be withdrawn. There it was, exactly where I'd expected it. They weren't trying to solve the problem. They were trying to eliminate the investigation. I slowly removed a yellow legal pad from my briefcase. I have a few questions first. Rebecca nodded politely. Of course. I looked toward Thomas. When exactly did the gastrointestinal outbreak begin? He answered immediately. October 18th. I wrote the date down, then looked at Renee. How many residents became ill? She hesitated. I don't remember the exact number. Approximately, perhaps 12. I nodded, then turned toward the physician. When did you examine my mother? He looked confused. I beg your pardon? You diagnosed agitation. I relied on nursing observations. So, I waited. You never personally evaluated her before recommending medication. Silence. I wrote another note. Rebecca spoke. I don't believe we're here to assign blame. No, we're here to establish facts. I opened another folder. This is the County Health Department's report for October. I slid it across the table. No gastrointestinal outbreaks were reported by Willow Creek. No one moved. I continued. This is Section 14(3) of your residency agreement. Another document. It requires written notification to every resident representative within 24 hours. I looked at Thomas. Can you produce that notice? He didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. I placed another paper on the table. This is Dr. Levin's examination. Then another. And these are photographs of bruising on my mother's wrists. Renee stared at the photographs without speaking. I reached into my briefcase again. This is your own state inspection report. I opened it directly to page 98. It documents repeated failures to safeguard residents' personal belongings. Thomas's jaw tightened. I wasn't finished. And finally, I placed the last folder in front of Rebecca. Corporate registration documents for Haven Ridge Resident Solutions. She looked at the company name, then at me. I don't understand its relevance. I think you do. I slid the blank authorization form beside it. Enhanced Asset Coordination Program. The color drained from Renee's face. Thomas looked toward Rebecca. Rebecca remained perfectly still for the first time since entering the room. Nobody spoke. Rebecca finally broke the silence. Laura. Yes? I think this meeting should end. I agree. Thomas looked relieved, until I continued. I'll see all of you again. He frowned. What do you mean? I've already met with the Department of Health. No reaction. I've also spoken with Dr. Levin. Still nothing. And yesterday I provided documentation to the Attorney General's Elder Protection Unit. That got their attention. Thomas turned sharply toward Rebecca. She hadn't known. I could tell instantly. Neither had Renee. Interesting. Corporate counsel had come expecting to negotiate. Instead, she had just learned the matter had expanded beyond a regulatory complaint. Rebecca closed her folder. We'll need to consult internally. I'm sure you will? I stood. So are we finished? She nodded once. As I reached the door, Thomas spoke. Laura. I looked back. I hope you understand the consequences of making serious allegations. I smiled. I do. Then I paused. I also understand the consequences of altering medical records. His expression changed instantly. Not anger, fear, real fear. Because I hadn't accused him of altering records. I'd simply watched his face after saying the words, and his reaction told me everything. An hour later, Investigator Brooks called. They've started uploading revised documents into your mother's electronic chart. I froze. How do you know? Our inspection team requested access this morning. Can they see when records were changed? Every edit leaves a timestamp. I felt my pulse quicken. So if they've rewritten notes, we'll know. For the first time in weeks, hope outweighed anxiety. Not because we had won, because people who panic make mistakes. And Haven Ridge had just begun making them. The next morning, my phone rang before sunrise. It was Angela. Her voice was calmer than I'd ever heard it. Laura. Yes? We compared yesterday's chart to the backup files. I gripped the phone. And Someone changed 36 clinical notes. My heart pounded. After the investigation began? Yes. She paused. There's more. What? We recovered the original versions. I held my breath. The originals describe your mother as alert, independent, fully oriented. I closed my eyes. Everything they had claimed, everything they had documented, everything they had tried to build, had collapsed in a single forensic comparison. Angela took one slow breath before speaking again. The search warrants are being prepared. I didn't answer. Because for the first time since I had walked into Willow Creek carrying a bag of warm lemon cookies, I finally believed my mother was going home. I just didn't realize yet. She wouldn't be the only parent leaving that building once the truth came out. The search warrants were executed on a rainy Tuesday morning. I wasn't there when investigators entered Willow Creek. Angela Brooks had made that very clear. If this turns into a criminal investigation, she told me, you don't want to become a witness who accidentally influences testimony. So, I waited. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. For 3 hours, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I took the first sip. Every few minutes, I looked at my phone. Nothing. Then, just after noon, it rang. Laura? It was Angela. We've finished the initial search. My heart pounded. What did you find? A lot. She didn't elaborate immediately. Instead, she asked a question. Do you remember the photograph of your father that disappeared from your mother's room? I'll never forget it. We found an entire storage room. I frowned. What kind of storage room? One that wasn't listed on the facility inventory. A chill ran through me. What was inside? Angela took a slow breath. Hundreds of personal belongings. Not dozens. Hundreds. Family photo albums, wedding rings, letters, financial statements, power of attorney documents, military medals, birth certificates, framed photographs, boxes labeled only with room numbers, residents' lives, packed away like forgotten furniture. My eyes filled with tears. My mother's picture wasn't an accident. No, it wasn't. Investigators also discovered something even more disturbing. Locked filing cabinets filled with incomplete authorization forms. Many were unsigned. Some contained signatures that immediately appeared questionable. Others had handwritten notes clipped to the front. Discuss after daughter leaves. Son visits too frequently. Recommend behavioral evaluation. Delay financial conversation until adjustment period complete. Each sentence, by itself, sounded almost harmless. Together. They painted a picture no brochure could hide. Not one of care, but of strategy. Over the following weeks, investigators interviewed employees one by one. Most denied knowing anything. Some insisted they had simply followed policy. A few resigned without explanation. Then Kelsey called me, the receptionist, the young woman who had looked frightened the day I first arrived with the lemon cookies. She asked if we could meet somewhere away from Willow Creek. We chose a quiet coffee shop across town. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. She barely touched her drink. I almost quit my first week, she admitted. Why didn't you? I needed the insurance. I understood. Life has a way of making decent people stay in places they know they shouldn't. I want to tell you what happened. I turned on the small recorder my attorney had advised me to carry. Kelsey nodded. I know. She began speaking slowly. When residents first arrived, we were told to learn everything. Medical history? That too. What else? Family relationships? Money. Who visited? Who didn't? I stayed silent. The administrators called it building resident profiles. And was it? At first, I thought so. She looked down. Then I noticed something. What? The residents with involved families. She hesitated. Were treated differently. How? They were labeled difficult family, overprotective daughter, controlling son, legal risk. The last phrase caught my attention. Legal risk? She nodded. If someone asked too many questions, we'd receive emails warning staff to document every interaction, every disagreement, every complaint. Even if it was minor, even if the resident was right, the more documentation they created, the easier it became to describe someone as confused, or emotional, or combative. I suddenly understood why my mother's chart had filled with vague observations after I challenged Thomas Vale. They weren't documenting her behavior, they were building a defense. Within 2 months, state regulators suspended Willow Creek's operating license pending further proceedings. Thomas Vale resigned before the board could terminate him. Renee Dalton lost her nursing license after investigators concluded she had approved clinical documentation that failed to meet professional standards. Several civil lawsuits were reopened. Families who had quietly accepted settlements years earlier contacted investigators again. Maria Santos called me one evening. They finally listened. Her voice sounded lighter than it had during our first conversation. My father deserved that. Yes, he did. We cried together for a few minutes, not because either of us had won, because justice had finally arrived for people who weren't alive to see it. My mother came home in early December, not to the old house. That had already been sold. Instead, she moved into the small cottage behind my home. Years earlier, my husband and I had renovated it as a guest house. Now it became hers. She planted herbs beside the porch, complained about my coffee, beat me at Scrabble almost every Sunday, and every evening at 7 o'clock. Just as we had before Willow Creek. We sat together on the back porch. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Neither of us needed many words anymore. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of her boxes, my mother found my father's photograph. She cleaned the frame with the sleeve of her sweater before placing it beside her favorite chair. She smiled at the picture, then looked at me. You know what scared me the most? I thought it was when they took your phone. She shook her head. No, I was afraid you might believe them. I walked across the room and hugged her. I never doubted you. She rested her head against my shoulder. I know. After a moment, she smiled. But I'm glad you read contracts for a living. I laughed. So am I. Almost a year later, I was invited to speak at a conference for elder care advocates. People expected me to discuss legal strategy, contract language, regulatory reform. Instead, I held up a simple framed photograph, the same one that had disappeared from my mother's room. My mother taught me something, I said. When someone wants to control another person, they don't always begin by taking money. The room was silent. They begin by taking connection. The phone, the visitors, the photographs, the memories. They convince someone that the people who love them have stopped coming. I looked around the auditorium. If you're ever told your parent is suddenly confused, ask questions. If you're told visits are becoming disruptive, read the policy. If you're asked to sign paperwork, read every page. And if anyone ever tells you that love is making your parent worse, walk in anyway. The audience stood before I had even finished speaking. Not because of me, because every person in that room knew someone who had once trusted a smiling brochure more than their own instincts. Afterward, dozens of families came forward with stories of their own. Some wanted legal advice. Others simply wanted someone to believe them. I listened to everyone, because I had learned something Willow Creek never understood. The strongest protection an elderly parent can have isn't hidden in a contract. It isn't a surveillance camera. It isn't even the law. It's a son or daughter who refuses to stop showing up. And sometimes, that's all it takes to bring an entire system crashing down.